Hello, my name is Ana Belén Ferrada, joined by Yessenia Herrera, María José Parra, and Diego Rojas, and today we are going to present our analysis of assessing speaking. This assessment was delivered by the teacher Diego Rojas on June the 12th in a 10th grade. The established goal was students will be able to orally argue the quality of a product. The validity argument for each word of this learning objective is that the word orally means spoken interaction with others or the examiner. Besides, Luoma in 2004 states that speech consists of idea units which are short phrases and clauses. The verb argue is located in the evaluation level of Bloom's taxonomy, in which students should be able to justify a stand or decision, and in this case, the quality of the product that students are selling. Quality refers to words we use to compare and highlight characteristics. And finally, the product will be an article that should be sold by students. When it is referred to the national curriculum of 10th graders, we found the following learning objective that better suits with the one established above. The learning objective number 5 in the 10th curriculum suggests that students should be able to orally present information using different resources to creatively support the given message, which can be about a variety of topics. Also, through this skill, students should demonstrate the knowledge of the content and coherence when organizing their ideas. In this case, learners present a specific product, highlighting and comparing its characteristics with other articles, activity in which they were asked to be intelligible and fluent. In terms of the operationalization of the learning objective, the teacher Diego considered an oral test and a holistic rubric to assess students' performance, which is based on the rationale of assessing for learning. However, my classmates will describe the purpose of the objective further on. Diego decided to use a holistic rubric as a meaningful way to encourage his students to keep improving their speaking skills. Moreover, as most students get frustrated when receiving feedback with long rubrics, Diego considered important to design a holistic rubric in which students can receive a feedback with their achievement and the aspects they are capable to do, rather than just focusing on the weaknesses and mistakes they made during the performance. Luoma supports this idea by asserting that holistic rating scales make rating quick because there is less to read and remember than in a complex grid with many criteria. Holistic scales are also flexible in that they allow many different combinations of strengths and weaknesses within a level. Besides, Diego decided to use the characters of a famous Spanish series called La Casa de Papel, which is a common interest among his students. This was another strategy to motivate students to read and remember the feedback that Diego gave them. According to the characteristics of each character, students were able to notice the level of achievement in which they are, so they knew the aspects needed to become a professor. According to Luoma, this test can be considered as an open-ended speaking task, in which the main activity was a role play. Some students took the role of sellers and the others were clients. Luoma asserts that the main purpose in open-ended tasks is to get the examinees to do something with language as an indication of their skills. Besides, this was a task in which students simulate a real-life activity where they can perform as sellers or clients.
Okay, in terms of the purpose, the idea of the teacher was to give students feedback for learning. To do so, it was implemented a formative assessment as it didn't have a mark and the results would be considered for future activities regarding the speaking skill. The idea of this formative assessment was to make students feel more relaxed and more comfortable when doing the activities. Because when they knew that this assessment did not have a mark, they felt more relaxed. However, they didn't feel as this assessment was not important, because they were explaining that what was the idea of this assessment, and they understood, and they worked very well while doing this activity. According to the assessment reform group, the assessment carried out can be considered as for learning owing to the use given, since its purpose was promoting collaborative work and students' learning, especially regarding the speaking skill. Moreover, this assessment differs from other assessments that are designed for ranking or for certifying competence. This type of assessment was the first time that students. It was the first time that students faced this type of assessment, which made the students maintain focused when giving the instructions. As for the context of this 10th grade, I can say that students are not used to work in speaking activities. This is because what they usually do in the English lessons is to read or listen to different types of text and then answer listening or reading comprehension questions. The speaking activities that I have observed is just to mainly to memorize a specific number of words and then tell the meaning of these words to the teacher. In fact, their speaking assessments were usually about reading aloud or memorizing a piece of writing, in which the teacher focused on the pronunciation and the materials used for the presentation, such as a PowerPoint presentation, images, or just to name a few. From what I have observed also during my time attending this school also is that students are used to work individually, because there is no much inclusion of pair work or group work. Also, students are usually reluctant to read aloud when they are asked to. What happened when they are asked to read a piece of writing aloud is that they say that they don't feel confident to do it, that they do not know English, that they don't want to do it. That's mainly because they don't have confidence in themselves. Um, I can say that students and that normally students understand spoken English, but they struggle to use it to communicate, because normally there are just a few people that try to use English in the activities that are carried out during the lessons. So the idea of this activity, one of the purposes of this activity was to decrease students' level of anxiety, because as they are usually reluctant to speak in English, when they knew that this assessment was without a mark, they felt more confident and they started to work on this activity. Based on the book from Flores and Simons about teaching for learning, we can consider that this assessment has a formative nature, as its purpose is to help shape what lies ahead instead of simply measuring and recording past achievements. The idea is to use the evidence collected to adapt the teaching to meet students' need. In terms of communication, the teacher communicated the purpose of this assessment, which was to promote collaborative work and learning, since this evidence would be used to meet students' needs, and the results would be used for future teaching strategies and activities. When the teacher was in front of the class, he presented this activity, which was the role play. He explained how a role play works, and then he asked asked the students to think of any product that they would like to sell. Students who will have time to think and write the qualities of the product so that they can use the grammar structure, which was about comparatives and superlatives. The teacher also communicated that the students were going to present their arguments in front of the class. Students will be assessed. I said that the students will be assessed with this holistic rubric made by the teacher, in this case me, and I explained how it was going to work. The students liked the structure of this rubric, especially because of the characters used, which were from a TV series that most of the students knew. According to Flores and Simons, I don't know how to pronounce it, sorry, to give the characteristics for speaking assessments are fundamental for these tasks. Because these characteristics include the structure of the test, which is how the structure of the test, which is how the test itself is organized. Usually these should be given as explicit and clear as possible. The instructions and how the language that is used will be evaluated. And that was communicated when I explained the use of the holistic rubric.
In terms of the setting or context of this assessment procedure, the teacher communicated this context before the activity. The students should imagine that they need to sell a product, but the person who is buying the product is not convinced about these characteristics. Therefore, they should persuade this person by arguing the characteristics of this product. According to Luoma, the context refers to everything in the speaking situation except the talk that is being produced at a particular moment. This means that a student should focus their attention on a specific product, on a specific context, in order to perform a strong performance. Concrete aspects of a situation, for example, the place where the talk happens, the cognitive and experiential aspects are important for this context. In this setting, the place where the talk happens, it should be a shop in which a person is buying a product and a seller. And the cognitive and experiential aspects are aspects that students should remember in order to perform this activity. With this, I refer that students should remember when they buy a product and they are not convinced. So what they should do in order to convince a person. So this activity was delivered for 40 students from 10th grade. The first part of the activity was a pair group. Then the students should share this performance as a group work, and then one representative from the group work should perform this activity as a summary of what they discussed first. In the case of the assessment procedure activity, this activity was a task, a role play. So how does this activity help me to achieve my goal? According to Baggett, in 1987, he argued two different talk in speaking assessment. He differentiates into evaluative talk and factually orientated talk, and he mentions that it is important to make this difference because when students are speaking, they are doing different mental process in which they can express orally. For example, it's not the same to justify than to describe. So in this case, this role play is an evaluative evaluative talk because they need to justify and to evaluate this product, the characteristics of this product, which enable them to persuade other people. In terms of what they need to focus on, which are the characteristics, students should say some characteristics using superlatives and comparatives adjectives. So this role play enable them to achieve the goal. This role play is also a real life or target task, which is mentioned by Noonan, who says that these types of tasks stimulate language use outside the classroom. This is an activity in which students should persuade another person or maybe to sell a product, and this activity happens in real life. So maybe in the future if they achieve this goal, it means that outside from the classroom they should be able to argue the characteristics of a product. So that is why this activity enable students to achieve the goal, and this activity may be an evidence to know if the students achieved or not their goal. In the case of expected evidence, from this assessment, it is expected that students argue a product. To doing so, they should describe their products by comparing and highlighting its characteristics. It is expected that they highlight and compare the characteristics of this product by using 5 superlative adjectives and 5 comparative adjectives. So it is important and fundamental to know if they are actually able to make a distinction between these types of adjectives, and also if they can use them. So as this is an oral assessment, intelligibility and fluency is also crucial because some words may hinder communication, and as we mentioned before, this is a communicative and real life task. So it is essential to know if students can communicate themselves. According to McNamara in 1996, strong performance testing replicates the real-life language use event and also employs real-world criteria for judging tasks' success. So this expected evidence, or the evidence that we gathered during this assessment, enabled us to give students feedback about their performance and to knowing what stage they are, and that is why we used the rubric with different characters levels. So for example, the professor level, which was the highest level, this person is very convincing and he uses many arguments when he is discussing some issue. So this is the level that we expect from students to perform. So in this level, students will demonstrate if they fully achieve the learning objective, or maybe they should work on some issues in order to achieve the highest level in this particular assessment.
In order to interpret the evidence, it is important to point out that, as my classmates have mentioned, the activity was made in pairs and later shared in groups, and that some representatives of those groups had to perform in front of the whole classroom. Hence, the teacher decided to record those students who presented in front of everybody. Later, we as a group analyzed the recordings and decided to transcribe the 3 that caught our attention the most. It is pivotal to mention that these are only 3 samples of what could be recorded. However, most students seem to be able to perform something similar to sample number 2. Okay, so in sample number 1, we can observe that the student was not able to properly use the 10 grammatical structures asked by the teacher, that were comparative and superlative adjectives, to give qualities to the product that he or she was selling. Thus, it affected the intelligibility of his or her speech. Moreover, many pauses were made, affecting the fluency of the student. It is important to mention that other grammatical mistakes that were not related to the ones required from the teachers were not considered. Hence, it can be stated that the student who provided this sample did not achieve the objective. Here, in sample number 2, we can see that some of the required structures to give qualities about the product are present. Nevertheless, it can be noticed that not all structures are properly written. Therefore, intelligibility was affected. Furthermore, many pauses were made that affected the pace of the speech of this student. Thus, the learning objective was not fully achieved. In this sample, we can observe that even though few pauses were made, the rhythm of this student's speech was not affected. It seemed that pauses were made only to reorganize ideas. Besides, all grammatical structures required to explain the qualities of the products are present and properly written. As in sample number 1, grammatical mistakes not related to the ones required from the teacher were not considered when assessing the student. Ergo, after analyzing this sample, it can be claimed that these students fully achieved the established goal. In terms of the use of interpretation, this was, as it was previously mentioned, a formative assessment, since it did not have a grade. It only sought to assess the process of students. It was made owing to the fact that the teacher wanted to know in which degree students were able to speak about a certain topic using the structures learned in classes. And as this was assessment for learning, the only usage that data can have is to inform the teaching decisions of Diego in terms of staying teaching the same content until students can manage the topic, or to move on to the next context required to be given by the Ministry of Education. All of this is in agreement with what Cambridge International Education Teaching and Learning Team asserts when they say that a student who receives a poor grade for a test may withdraw from learning, preferring to be taught lazy rather than stupid. With an AFL approach, teachers give learners task-specific feedback that focuses on the work rather than ego-specific feedback that focuses on personal qualities of the learner. This encourages every learner to feel that they can improve. That is to say, that the biggest contribution of assessment for learning is to increase confidence on students in order to be more willing to improve, given that they receive specific information provided from the teacher aiming at helping each learner to achieve the final goal.
Well, as a summary, the idea of using a holistic rubric and an assessment for and feedback for learning was successful since the students felt more relaxed when doing the activity and the data collected was useful for future activities, as the results gave a stronger notion of the students' needs. As for the activity itself, which was the role play, we think that it was appropriate because along with the setting, it made students feel as a real life situation activity in which they were eager to participate. Therefore, in general terms, the activity, we think that it was successful, and we think that the idea from now on is to keep doing such types of assessments in order to promote learning not only on speaking levels or listening links, but or listening or reading or writing levels, but as a whole. This was our presentation. Thank you for listening.